Hello and welcome to Makers.dev episode 55. We have the privilege of having with us Brian Casel. Brian, how's it going?
Hey, Christian and Chris, how's it going, guys? Yeah, fun to be on. I'm trying to make the rounds on all the Bootstrapper podcasts, so pretty excited.
I'm honored to be included in the round of Bootstrapper podcasts. That's really cool. I'd love to get started just by asking you about your backstory. I am familiar with you on Twitter from the microconf space and your previous company, Audience Ops. I was a customer of Audience Ops for a little bit, and I've been so impressed with you of I feel like you're doing the same sort of thing Chris and I are doing of jumping from project to project and building serial entrepreneur businesses, but it feels like you're doing it at a different level. Audience Ops, my understanding of it is it was this team of around a dozen employees of managers and writers and that kind of thing. And that's something that I'm struggling to I'm hiring my very first employee, a virtual assistant this week. And I'd just like to know, where did you come from? What led you to feel comfortable running that sort of business? And give me the story. Who are you?
Who am I? Oh man, this is gonna get deep. Well, I guess I would just preface all of this, and I try to do this. I tend to get asked a form of that question a lot on podcasts, because if you look at my website, which lists all my products, it's ridiculous. The list is never ending. Most of those, were not very significant products. And of course, not all of them happened in the same year. They happened over the course of, I've been self-employed for 13 years. So a lot of this stuff was started many years ago. And a lot of those projects and products were either sold or shut down or maintenance mode or whatever, right? So there's that. Also, it's the classic highlight reel on Twitter and on podcasts. You're seeing the surface level, especially I don't have a massive audience, but I have some reach with my podcast and whatnot. And I think things that we tend to say on air, this is probably true for you guys too. When you're talking about your projects and businesses, just the fact of talking about it publicly makes it sound a little bit bigger than it might actually be. I mean, I've just noticed that with myself. People have an impression of my businesses that probably make it feel like it's slightly bigger than it actually is, just from the fact of sharing it publicly, for better or worse. Okay, so Audience Ops, that was a business that I started in 2015, right at the same time that I sold my previous business, which was a website builder for restaurants called Restaurant Engine. I started Audience Ops, and at the time I sold it, which was just 3 months ago in 2021, it actually had a team of about 25 people. Almost all of them were contractors, are contractors, some ranging from just a few hours a week to it's most of their week. Many of them are stay-at-home parents. Many of them have other gigs going on. But Audience Ops was sort of the rock for many of them, a very solid, steady, ongoing retainer. And I love talking about how proud I am of the fact that the team, most of the team, was in that capacity for 4, 5, 6 years. Not just one and done hired guns, a really dedicated, super talented team. So and they're still running. They're doing awesome under the new owner, JD.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's that. I mean, in terms of the bigger picture, Audience Ops for me was a really good chapter in my career, because I spent the first few years, 2015, 16, 17, really building that business, figuring out the processes, how to sell it to clients, how to hire for it, how to build processes and delegate those to the team. But then by 2018, I had basically removed myself from the day-to-day. I'm not completely checked out, or I haven't been completely checked out. Of course, things go to my inbox. For a while there, I was still doing some sales calls, but eventually somebody else took that over too. It got to a point where I was spending 3 to 5 hours total, a month, really touching that business in 15-minute spurts, right? Of something came to my inbox. But for the most part, amazing managers, amazing team, amazing writers, they handled almost everything. And that really freed me up from like 2018 on. That's like in 2018 was when I really dove into learning like Ruby on Rails and just reinvesting all of that free time. I had an income from Audience Apps, so that gave me the freedom to invest in learning and also the runway of bootstrapping SaaS products. And some of them have not worked. And then ZipMessage most recently is the one that I'm focused on now, and that one seems to have clicked a little bit better, like 4 years later.
When you sound incredibly modest, saying that like having a podcast about things makes it magnified and bigger than it is, and like yes, of course, that's why Chris and I have this podcast. But you had 25 people. That's so many, and yes, there were contractors, but like incredible. That's a lot. I think I'm really curious. Like the struggle that I see Chris and I have in our businesses is like going from scaling that it's just us working on the business and we're doing the marketing and the development work and everything else, to getting that like one extra person of, okay, sure, here and there we'll hire a contractor to do something, but to have ongoing contractors where this is like the majority of their stable backbone of work. That's inspiring. That's something I'd like to work towards.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, very different types of businesses here, right? I mean, you guys are software businesses. Audience Apps was a product. I say was because I don't own it anymore, but it's still very much alive. They're awesome. But it's a productized service. So manually done services, very, very repeatable and standardized. I think that's the key that really worked for me with that business was that, I think the big challenge with hiring people in general, especially when you're sort of new to it, it's learning to manage people, and when every project is not very similar from one to the next, then it's just a lot of work to manage and then remanage every single project, because then you're giving instructions again and again and again. Whereas if the business itself sells a very standardized productized service like we did with Audience Ops, then you're basically training the team to do something once and then they do it repeatedly, and then it gets to a point where even the team can train more team members, so that's essentially the model in a nutshell. I mean, the other, you like, I definitely learned what, there are different factors that went into hiring people at Audience Apps specifically that made them work really well long term, and we had plenty who just didn't last more than 3 months with us, and we started to learn what those factors are in that business, and started to optimize our hiring for that. And of course, systems and processes really helped a lot too. I mean, on the software side, like ZipMessage, it's me and one developer right now. So it's like back to square one. Basics, just super small. I mean, I have not scaled up a software business before, so that's still a new process for me now. But I'm not really looking to. I would like to keep it small if I can. But yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I was going to ask that related to team, which is, I think Christian and I both try to actively avoid hiring other people, even contractors. Like, we kind of like doing everything ourselves. And I've had one employee before, but nothing like 25 people, even contractors. So like, as you're thinking about ZipMessage, are you going to do it again? Are you going to hire a team? You said small. Does small mean, like 1 or 2 people, or does it mean, a dozen? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not one of these people who will like never hire. I definitely intend to grow the business, and that's going to require more heads than just me. I mean, I've gotten into a really, really good groove with me plus one full-time developer. So basically there's 2 of us full-time on the product, and we're able to ship really fast and ship a lot of product. And as it stands today, I don't yet see a need to add another developer, but that could change like by the end of this year. And for those who aren't familiar with ZipMessage, it's basically a tool for video messaging. So sending video messages asynchronously to your team. But then the sort of the unique thing that makes it a little bit different from like a Loom or something like that is that it's really easy to go back and forth and have a threaded conversation asynchronously on one page. Really great for sending messages back and forth with clients or your remote team. And so we just capped off the first year of ZipMessage. And now in 2022, we're going to do a product hunt launch. I think a few days after this podcast comes out. So January 11th, if you want to save the date, Tuesday. So yeah, we're really trying to kick off this year, make it have a splash here. But to answer your question, I'm definitely of the mindset of, especially with a software business here, the mindset is don't grow the head count unnecessarily. That doesn't mean hustle my ass off every day and night, but I just really like to work efficiently and fast. And actually, when it comes to development and product, I think that we're way faster, just me and one person, than we would be if we were 5 or 10 people on the product. You know, I think with software, at least my hunch is right now, is like the more people we add, actually it's going to slow us down more than speed us up a little bit. You know, I have also been working with freelance marketing folks, some people writing content, some people helping in different areas there. So I'll outsource. I say outsource, but I tend to work very closely, like in collaboration with folks. But you know, I'm not trying to be doing all of the marketing work myself. Trying to be efficient there as well. But you know, my goal with this business is for it to be another sort of long-term business. You know, I would love for it to be the next chunk of my career here, 5-10 years. I don't know. But if we remain under 10 people, 5 to 10 people, that would be awesome. You know?
Yeah. I was going to say, I find the same thing especially with early stage and prototyping is like, if 1 or 2 people is like the sweet spot, and you get more than that, and then you have to have conversations about everything, and that really slows stuff down. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
The network, the number of different interactions that can happen explodes exponentially.
But actually, like going back to audience ops for a second, like when I started, it was a very different goal for me when I started that business. When I started that one, like I sort of made a rule for myself with it. I was like, this business is only going to work if I'm not writing articles for clients. Like I'm just never, I had never wrote any articles for clients. In the beginning, I sort of project managed a little bit. But even that, I like the goal for the business was start this service, build processes, build a team so that I'm not doing the service every day. Like that was intentionally from day one. So like on day one, I hired like 2 writers and then a few months in hired the first project manager and assistant. And that's why that business is specifically sort of designed to grow a team around it, you know?
I'm really curious about your move to software businesses. The way you're describing how you're handling more of a productized service business is by having a rigorous focus on the process and the systematizing and making sure everything has a flow of the way that it's going, which sounds like you were able to apply software concepts to people. Like you're able to deploy process software in human brains. That seems to be an unfair advantage for you. Why are you moving into software if you've unlocked, like, you know how this thing works of how to get people to do stuff? What's the temptation of,
you know, I've heard that question before a couple times. And, you know, to be honest, like before I did audience ops and before I somehow became known as the productized service person, I mean, I have a course about it. That probably has something to do. But that, you know, I made that years ago in 2014, when I was at a point in my career where I had skills. So to answer your question, before all that, I was a web designer first, front-end web developer first. I started at a web agency and was a freelance web designer, developer for many years. And then I built Restaurant Engine, which was like a SaaS website builder for restaurants. And then I went into productized services. This sounds weird, but almost as like a crutch for not being a full stack developer.
Interesting.
Because I at the time in 2015 when I started Audience Ops, I did not have the skills to build a full web app. I did not have I was not a back end developer at all. I could only build front end stuff, WordPress stuff, design stuff, right? So I actually had a couple of ideas after I sold Restaurant Engine. I had a couple of ideas for what would my next business be. Two of them were like SaaS product ideas, and my fear at that moment was, all right, I like these ideas, but it's going to take over a year for me to build them and hire developers to build them, and then I will burn through all the cash that I just made from selling the business. So that's not going to be sustainable. It's going to put my finances way too much at risk. So like my question to myself was, what is the business that will replace my income as quickly as possible and be most sustainable going forward, that can free me up to then do SaaS later? That was literally my thinking when I started Audience Ops. It actually ended up growing faster than I expected, because you're selling a recurring service at a higher price point, and yeah, it did pretty well, but then it did take a little while to figure out the processes and the team and all that. And then I did start investing, like in 2017, I started investing the profits from that into building SaaS products by hiring back-end developers. Because I at that point I still did not have the ability to build a full web app myself. That didn't really go so well. I tried to build a SaaS. At the time it was called Ops Calendar, and I spent a lot of money on that and worked a lot on it for like a year and a half, and it didn't go anywhere. And then I got frustrated with that, and that's when in 2018 I was like, okay, I have a good cash flow business with Audience Ops. I've got a ton of free time. Before I go hire developers again, why don't I take this year and learn how to build my app ideas myself, start to finish? And it wasn't like learning from nothing. I was a front end, like professional level, HTML, CSS, some JavaScript. I had worked on many big name websites over the years, like not new to the front end, but kind of afraid of using like the command line. So I had to get over that, and databases, and then I fell into Ruby on Rails, and then I built a couple of products that really accelerated my learning on that. So
this is so interesting for me to hear you describe how you sort of as a step in the journey to being able to develop things in the back end, kind of accidentally developed this incredible skill of being able to manage a team and have 25 consultants working for you. But like it was still like to get to this place where you could feel comfortable in the command line and databases and the back end stuff. Because I'm coming at it from exactly the opposite. I'm trying to get to a place where I can run a business with a whole bunch of people, and my way through that is like, cutting my teeth on Rails and this back end stuff. Like,
well,
I think
I'm curious, like, what were you doing before what you're doing now? Like, were you doing like development consulting or full-time job, or what did that look like?
Chris has a different angle on this that I'd like to get into too, but my story is that I went straight from college to I was working with a startup for a summer, just like an internship, and I thought, this sucks, I hate working for other people, let me see if I can do consulting instead. And a week before I was going to sign a contract working as a Rails developer for a consultancy, a side project, File Inbox, started making more money than I would have been making if I was working full time. And so I thought, well, I guess I need to figure out how business works, because I would much rather do this.
That's amazing, man. Like, because that kind of success with a software product, early in your career is something so like I don't know where I am in my career right now, but I'm not at the beginning of it, and and I haven't really had like the full-time software success yet. So that's awesome.
It was awesome, and incredibly fortunate, and also terrifying. And like it's been a journey trying to backfill it. Like I felt petrified for years of just I don't know how or why this is making money, and so I'm terrified of changing anything. So let me just back away slowly and like see if it's gonna still make money. What's your story?
Sort of like answer your question though about the people, is that like before all that, I spent I became a freelance web designer in 2008. I was at an agency before that, but so from 2008, I probably phased out client work around 2012. But for 4 years there, I was started to scale up web design projects by hiring other freelancers. So hiring in that sense was not really new to me. And then Restaurant Engine, I spent 4 years building that, and that had a small team of people, contractors again. So every phase, like you pick up certain skills that by the time I got to audience ops, hiring and delegating processes was it wasn't my first rodeo on that.
Chris, you've had a sort of a hybrid career because you've done some of the consulting and you've also had an employee. How would you describe that journey?
Yeah. So yeah, I had a full-time job for 8 years, but it was at a small company. It was like between 3 and 12 people. We grew from 3 to 12. But I wasn't in charge there. I was, I was the lead developer, but, and then I did consulting for, I guess it's been about 5 years. So like I figured out how to make, money by getting clients. And then throughout the whole process, I've done some info products and some SaaSes, and that is it's just a very different skill set. Like I know how to build them up, up and down, and I can sell to big companies for a lot of money, but selling to a lot of small companies is something that is tricky. So yeah.
We've all got something to learn from each other. Let's start a startup, you guys. We got a team here. This is fun. Brian, I'd love to dig into your choice in Stack. We were talking a little bit before we started recording about your choice of Ruby on Rails. And I was surprised that as a framework clicked for you much more. Coming from a front-end background, I would think some combination of like React and Firebase would fit the best for you. It's surprising that like you having picked up backend stuff so recently that Rails is the stack that you landed on.
Yeah, so I think that with a lot of the quote unquote newer stuff out there, it's a bit of like I don't know what I don't know. So I haven't explored every framework out there. I mean that was actually intentional. Like I remember in 2018 when I made the decision to like dedicate that year to get myself from front end to full stack. I intentionally wanted to choose a stack that is boring and old and well adopted, and because that'll be the easiest for me to learn. There's tons of resources out there for the big name stuff, and also like if I build a business, it'll be easier for me to hire folks on that stuff. So with that in mind, like I mean, by that point I had a little bit of experience with Vue.js, in that the previous developers that I hired on that SaaS that didn't work, they chose Vue.js before I even knew what that was. And that project was extremely difficult to maintain it, and then it caused all these bugs and everything. And that was a lot of my inexperience of not knowing how to manage that type of stack, So I had that taste in my mouth coming out of the previous one. And I think as a front end, HTML, CSS, a bit of JavaScript experience, but not deep on JavaScript, I love simplicity. I just want to design a user experience and just make it in the browser and just not get bogged down with the technical with the technicalities. And basically my decision was like, okay, it's going to either be PHP and Laravel or Ruby on Rails. Those are like the two big name stacks that I could build a SaaS on and learn. And I started with Laravel. I thought that had more promise. It maybe today it still does. But I spent about a month or two on tutorials and courses learning how to build something in PHP, Laravel. And also PHP was more familiar to me than Ruby. I had never touched Ruby before. PHP, at least I had worked a lot with WordPress before. I went through a course, I think Jeffrey Way's Laravel Laracasts, right? So I went through that, and I just remember feeling like, okay, I followed along with all the lessons. I was able to build what he told me to build on the videos, but at the end of it, I could not take what I learned and go build a basic idea of my own. Like I still felt lost. Like I still felt like I forgot how to write this syntax or build this or that. Then I did another month and a half, same exact thing, but on Ruby on Rails. I found a course. The first one I took was called like 1 month Rails, which I burned through in like a week or two. Later on, I got a lot of value from like Go Rails and stuff, but that's a little bit more intermediate. So did that. And after a month of learning Ruby on Rails, like super basic 101 stuff, I was able to build a to-do list app like that I designed and built it. Like
amazing.
But that proved to me like this just clicks for me. I don't know what it is that makes it simpler or easier, but it just clicks. And then and that wasn't like a real product, but it was a functioning app, right? And then and I worked, and I had a lot of help from friends who would like coach me on stuff, and then I built a bunch of practice projects. But I mean, the other thing that really clicked for me with Ruby on Rails, and still to this day, is that they still have this ethos of like keep it simple, like it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, and even today with the newer stuff like Hotwire and Stimulus JS, which I've really used quite a bit on all my products now, it's just simpler and easier and faster to build, and I also really value maintainability. I find it's really, and this is another reason why I love Tailwind CSS and what Adam's built. I think Adam is a genius. Like stuff like that just makes it so easy to build. But to me, the real value, and this speaks to Tailwind as much as it does Ruby on Rails, it's the maintainability. It's when you have a project that has lasted more than a year, it's going to get gnarly in the code base. You got to be able to hop in there and be able to rework things without having to refactor the entire app. And that, that to me just makes Rails and Ruby code and Tailwind CSS just a kind of a no-brainer for me. And I love Stimulus too.
We now have two people for Ruby on Rails.
Yeah, I feel outnumbered here.
So in our startup, we're going Rails stack.
That's right.
Okay. I need to sprinkle some serverless functions in there, though. I gotta get that in there. Very good argument. Yeah, I think, and at the end of the day, I think it's so much more about the business than it is about the tech stack. I tend to have the shiny new object syndrome of like, here's this new way to do things and it's slightly better in this way, and look at this, you can structure this thing in this new paradigm, and I can learn all of these new things about coding, and it's from a business perspective, I think a distraction. I think it would be fun as like a CTO, but when you're trying to build a thing to make money, like, okay, no one knows what web stack your web app is framed in. The only thing they care about is how it's helping them to make their lives better, give them the superpowers. So in that light, I'm curious about how you're structuring ZipMessage as a company now. I was reading in your 2021 year in review that you accepted money from Tyler Tringus's Comp Company Fund. Congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thanks.
How could you frame a little bit how you're thinking about this as a business? Is like, what are you going to do with that money, and how are you framing the non-technical pieces of this business of like marketing and acquiring customers and things?
Yeah, sure. So ZipMessage, because I chose to take a bit of funding, ZipMessage Inc. is its own entity, and it's the first time I broke out its own entity. Everything else that I've ever done has been under my one kind of umbrella LLC. But ZipMessage is its own standalone business entity. So and Company Fund invested in it. That's been a really good experience so far. I'm really excited to. They've got a great community too. The mentors network is fantastic and everything. A lot of good supportive stuff for folks like us. To answer your question, yeah, like I said, like since the beginning, it's been me and one developer. On the marketing stuff, I've been looking, but I still haven't found like one long-term person to work with on that. So far it's been kind of hired guns here and there for writing some pieces here. I mean, I do all the design and stuff on the marketing website, but yeah, I'm actually sort of still figuring out marketing. I have plenty of plans and stuff for 2022, and some of them involve hiring some people, but yeah, that in terms of structure and team, that's still getting figured out.
There's something kind of unrelated. So we could take this as a tangent later if you want. But so you had one LLC and then you sold Audience Ops away from that LLC. And I'm just curious because I have one LLC with all my projects. So like, how much work was it to like separate that from your LLC? And would you recommend doing it that way or not?
Well, yeah. So definitely a few recommendations for you or anyone else in this position. So that sale was what they call an asset sale. So you're stripping out the asset. I still own my LLC, but now that asset has left the LLC. In my case, I talked a bit about this on Bootstrapped Web when we had the buyer come on the show, and we talked about it a little bit. But
cool.
I'll give you a little bit more here, where basically I had it in a good situation on the revenue side, but the expenses side was a bit of a problem. So on the revenue side, like Audience Ops had its own Stripe account, never mixed with any other stuff that I was doing. So it's super easy to see exactly, when you go through like due diligence and stuff like that, super easy to see how much revenue went through Audience Ops. On the expenses side, I did make the mistake of having a single business bank account and single business credit card across my different businesses. ZipMessage, I corrected this. It's its own separate thing, but that was very difficult. I had to. It's not impossible to overcome, but it does make it more difficult. And what I had to do was basically go through all of my bank statements and line by line itemize, like these expenses are Audience Ops and these are not, and these are not, and I mean, people wise it was easier because I only people I hired in Audience Ops did not work on my other stuff, so that was a little bit cleaner. But yeah, that's one thing to I mean, so I would not recommend getting forming a different LLC or a different corporation for every new idea that you have. I don't believe that's, and look, this is not lawyer or accountant advice. You'll have to talk to them about that. But my take on it is, yes, have one LLC for your own protection and everything. But once it's like significant enough, maybe think about breaking it out. Or I mean, the reason I broke out ZipMessage is because I took on an investor. That's a separate entity. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
This is going to sound like a silly question. What are you spending money on? What you have all this money from Comp Company now. How do you spend that money? You said you have some hired guns for marketing and things. I'm particularly interested in your answer to this because I think you're much better at spending money on people, and I can see people being like a good way to you could just dump money in people and have them do work for you.
Yeah. So, first of all, it's not a ton of money. It's not like VC. It's not millions.
Sure.
So it's really just enough to fund, a year or two of the upcoming runway. And I mean that's supplemented with my own cash from the sale of Audience Ops, and for the first 8 months of ZipMessage, I was self-funding it, from running, from profits from Audience Ops, basically. So my thinking on it is really not much is changing. Like to me, it came down to a question of, am I going to completely self-fund this business, or for the first time take a little bit of outside funding and not have to self-fund it? Because either way, I knew I was going to continue working with I had my one developer before I took funding. I knew I was going to continue with that developer. I knew I was going to do marketing stuff that would involve hiring a few contractors, like, so it's not making me hire people who I would not have normally hired. And it's, it's weird. It's like sometimes I feel a little bit more aggressive because I have cash in the bank to be able to run little marketing experiments. At other times it makes me a little bit more conservative, because it's a runway in the bank that I'm drawing down until the business is profitable, so in that sense, it actually makes me a little bit more conservative about again, I'm not trying to grow headcount unnecessarily.
That was a very good answer, and I need it broken down a little bit more. I'm having trouble finding places in my business to spend money, and the money that you're using, is that your salary and your developer's salary and Heroku costs and Google AdWords? When you're writing checks, what are the biggest places where the money's going?
Yeah, I mean, we're not running any ads right now. So the biggest expense would be my developers. Technically it would be mine. I'm not necessarily taking a salary from the business yet, but I will be. So it would be salaries, and it's basically just me and my developer. I have server costs, and I have marketing, like tools that we use that we pay for. But frankly, I'm not spending a lot other than that, right? So I'm trying not to spend a lot. I'm trying to keep the war chest in place for when we need to spend it, and we don't need to go on a spending spree, at least not yet. So that's sort of how I think. Like I do all the customer support still. I don't feel the pain of needing to outsource that. I'm sure I will at some point, and then I'll look to hire someone, but that's not yet. On marketing, again, I'm still figuring this out. And where I've come to now is as much as I want to be the head of product, which I am, that product is where I live every day. That's literally where I spend my hours, designing. I build at least half the features, and then the other half I'm directly directing my developer on how to build them, testing and all that kind of stuff. And so that's where I spend most of my time, but I have to be the marketer too. And that means basically marketing strategy. Yes, I'll do some personal stuff like going on podcasts like this, but we're doing some SEO targeted content. So I'll help strategize how that should be, but then I'll hire a writer to write it. Pretty soon we'll be doing a lot more integrations. So I'll be personally developing those partnership relationships, and then probably me and my developer building the integrations, so yeah, doing stuff like that. I mean, the other thing that we recently changed in ZipMessage is we made it free. We added a freemium plan. So that was sort of a big decision, and now it's actually working. It's actually pretty good for the business. And so a big focus is going to be what they call product-led growth, right? Yes, we need to do marketing activity to get traffic and new users to the site, but a lot of the effort is how can we get these users using it and sharing it and getting more exposure through the product, because it is a viral product. So that's where a lot of my thinking is right now.
Yeah, I heard you talk on another podcast, I think, about how the move to freemium made a lot of sense for you because you could share it with someone and they could have an account without ever signing up, but they could still be sharing their thing. So I think it makes a ton of sense for your thing. Would you recommend freemium if it makes a little less sense? I would say it's not quite a viral thing now that you've done both freemium and not freemium. Would you recommend freemium as a growth strategy, or only if it makes sense for the product like it does for yours?
Yeah, I would never recommend almost anything. I would never recommend as a blanket statement. It's totally
Sure.
dependent. And I default to not freemium, and I did on ZipMessage. Like the first 9 months was not freemium. But yeah, it for that product, it logically it makes sense. Like I still sort of have, but now it's we've had a good past few months on freemium, but on the first month of it, I was still pretty apprehensive. Like the whole idea of giving a product away for free does not come easy to a bootstrapper like me, but luckily we're still seeing pretty steady conversions with it. So
Cool.
I think it really makes sense when the product has a viral component. Because the thing that I came to is that like without a free plan, it really, really limits the pool of people who could potentially share it with someone else, and that's really the whole goal with a product like this. So
For something like messaging, that makes a lot of sense. Like Slack, I think part of their story is their viral growth from if you have one person in your company using Slack and they're able to get a few more people in the company using Slack. Okay, now everyone in the company is using it. You've got them in the trap, and now you can have the unit of the company at some point when it makes sense that they're getting value from it to start paying for it.
And I mean, I'm still learning with this stuff. It's very new for me. Only a few months into freemium now, but I'm already seeing like changes that I made in the product, especially like our onboarding, have directly impacted the number of active users and then the number of new referred like viral signups, because we changed a way that somebody shares a message, So I'm starting to see some like early wins with that, and I could see how we still need to do marketing, I'm hoping a good like product hunt launch. I'm hoping some of this SEO stuff really kicks in, and so we still need top of funnel, but ultimately it's the product, and that's what I like to design and build. So feels like a fun product to work on if I can get it really working.
For SEO, might I recommend hiring a consultancy that could write a whole bunch of blog posts for you?
Yeah, I wonder where I could find one of those.
I've got a recommendation for you. I'll send it to you afterwards.
Well, one of the as you might imagine, like I'm actually contractually not. I could hire audience ops, but I can't work with any of that team directly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How fun. It feels sort of like exclusive of like, oh, I was the owner, so I can't go in there. That would feel cool. I'd love to talk about some fun stuff. I saw on your 2021 year in review that you ordered a Tesla Model Y, and I think that's really cool. I just got a Tesla and I love it. It was my dream car for a long time.
Well, I'm super jealous because I'm still waiting for mine.
Yeah. It was like a 5-month waiting period for mine. It was nuts.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in like my 5th month of waiting now. So.
Oof. The Y, I think, was a longer waiting period. When I was looking at it, like the used ones were $3,000 to $10,000 more because you could pick them up same day as opposed to this waiting period.
Right.
Yeah, it's a weird market right now.
What do you have? The 3?
The 3,
the
yes.
Yeah.
The cheapest one I could possibly get, but I 3D printed so the only difference externally between the cheapest and the most expensive Model 3 is this little emblem on the back that says dual motor with an underline, and that's how you know someone paid like $25,000 more for theirs. So right? I 3D printed a quad motor emblem and I put it on the back.
I always look at the wheels. I always look at the wheels that they show, right? So that was like, I think the wheels was like the one upgrade that we did, just because I just don't like the look of the default wheels.
Sure.
And I'm not usually like a flashy person or anything, but like the ordered. I was really excited to be able to order one, because like everyone else in our industry, it's kind of like a lifelong dream. But still waiting for it. It says sometime in February. I'm waiting. And of course, I have like 3 trips in February, so I'm sure I'm going to miss it. So.
The exact same thing happened to me. I had mine and I was on the waiting list forever. And then I was scheduled to be in Europe for a month. And 4 days into the trip, I got the notification that like it was being delivered, and I was like, no. So I'm there in like, you know, Rome at the Colosseum, just like, okay, yes, this is great, but on my app,
I kind of got to get out of here.
yeah, I would push the button to like, you know, flash the lights or honk the horn, and just be like, my dream car is waiting for me. It was a good
any
practice.
like any surprises or things that are interesting about it that you didn't expect?
It's amazing, and it makes me feel alive, and I love driving in it every time, and I have no complaints. It's a little. One of my friends got a Lexus recently, and being in their Lexus, I'm like, ooh, this is a really nice car. Like the product, the fit and finish of everything, and everything just feels really nice in a way that in a Tesla feels sort of chintzy and plasticky that I hadn't realized before, that in a luxury sedan I'd expect that finish to be a little nicer. But like, I'm not buying it for the quality of the plastic things on the doors or the door skins. I'm buying it because like it's a computer on wheels, and so for that, like it's not like the elevated elegant experience of like, oh, I'm in a suit and I'm gonna go to the gala. It's like I'm a tech bro and computers are cool. Totally. So for that, I love it. It's a really cool car.
Yeah, I was last night I was tuning into some recent interview with Elon Musk, and man, I'm just always blown away at just, I mean, the guy is like superhuman. I mean, I like I didn't even realize this. He said in this interview that he is the chief engineer at SpaceX. He's not just the CEO. He's the chief engineer, and he was describing how like every rocket launch and everything in the rockets, like he signs off on all the design and engineering decisions. Which is crazy to me, because then in the same interview he goes on to like go in insane detail on the Tesla self-driving tech under the hood. This was like a super technical interview, right? And it's like, how does the chief engineer of SpaceX day to day also know the inner workings of how they like rewrote C code just to build Teslas? Like, like it's insane, you know?
Yeah. If you've never heard any of he's done some really detailed rocket interviews with like rocket YouTube channels, and yeah, he knows every inch of that rocket and every inch of the car. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
It's literally like superhuman. Like,
and he's also really well versed in software businesses. Like he cut his teeth on X.com, which turned into PayPal. Like, I read his biography recently, and Chris and I were talking about it on this podcast. And like, I was reading this, just like, what have I done with my life? Like, how has he accomplished so much? And it's inspiring. It's helped me like reframe what is possible to do in a single human lifetime.
Well, but then we came to he works 100-hour weeks and has had 3 divorces. So,
Yeah, there's that too. Yep.
Yeah. But still, I'd like to have more of that sort of thing in my life. You read some very interesting books that were on your list that I'll say the titles of the books. I don't know if this is going to turn anything, but Sapiens, Breath, and Bogle's Guide to Investing, 3 books that you read last year that I really enjoyed. Those are 3 of my favorite books.
I mean, I listened to them. I got more into exercising in the past year, and I tried to pair that with listening to more books.
Clever.
And those were a couple of them. I just listed all the books that I did listen to last year. Not all of them were like my favorites or anything, but got to a point where, so the investing one, the Bogleheads, I've always just felt like a dummy when it comes to kind of self, like managing money and doing the smart optimal thing with it. So I tend to, maybe this is smart, is just default to like the safest long-term stuff, but I wanted to get a better understanding of how to manage all of that and where to put things. And I learned just enough to know, like, okay, I think what I'm already doing is boring enough, so I'll just leave it.
That's something I'm curious about, because a thing that I've struggled with specifically in SaaS is thinking about how to think about my software business as a component of my investing portfolio. And I haven't quite figured out what that balance is, you mentioned that you're also personally investing in ZipMessage. What was your mental framing of, especially after reading this book, like how do you think about asset allocation and where you're investing?
Well, just in my business, I always think of my business and basically the career here that I'm investing in as like my number one asset that I'll ever own. And the cash that I get, whether it's paying myself or profit dividends or selling a business, that goes into savings. And reading that book was like, well, what do I do with that savings now? 'Cause I don't really know. And I basically put it into boring index funds for the most part. A little bit of crypto, but that's it.
That's the way to do
and
it.
Teslas.
Good.
Which are an appreciating asset, right?
Yes. The business, I just think of it as an asset that I'm growing, and that's how I think about like design, like choosing what business to get into. I mean, you asked earlier, like, why don't I just keep doing productized services, and why did I go into SaaS? Well, it's not financial, but that's one component, right? Like the number one reason is because I do love the designing and making software products. I actually like it a lot more than making processes for a team. But SaaS is such a brilliant business model, and the valuations, I'm not one of these people who's going to build a SaaS business and say I'll never sell it. Like, yeah, I probably will sell it. That's going to be the most likely outcome at some point. Hopefully not anytime soon. I really hope to be working on ZipMessage for a long time here. I'd like to settle into it for a while, but it's an asset that I'm looking to grow, and it's I mean, there's no sign of SaaS in general as going downward in terms of valuation. So, it's a good thing to be in. I think we're all pretty lucky to be in this industry.
That's where I've landed too. I've been exploring in this podcast, chatting with Chris about alternative assets and like renting out cars and like real estate and things. And I keep coming back to just, man, SaaS is great. Like in SaaS, if you have income of, $200 a month, from the SaaS context, it's like, what a tiny, terrible SaaS business. But in real estate, if you have a cash flow of $200 a month from a house that's, you're paying whatever, $1,000 a month in the mortgage, and you have a tenant in there right now that's paying you $1,200, so you're making an extra $200 a month, and you're paying off the mortgage, you'd be like, wow, this is amazing. I have passive cash flow of $200. It's unfair. Software is,
especially once it really works and it grows into a significant business, then the profit margins. I mean, I think that there's, I have a lot of friends who've grown much bigger SaaS companies, and I think the reality is, it's probably for a while it's not as profitable as people might think. Especially if the SaaS is growing fast, you're going to have to hire. Sort of depends on the product, but like your expenses will grow very fast too. But then it does get to a point where the valuations and the profit margins can really go. And I also think that a lot of SaaS and software companies, just from my observation, again, I haven't been at their level of a SaaS business before, so I can't speak from personal experience, but my impression is that there are still lots of software companies that just hire a lot more than maybe is necessary. And that's again why I would like to keep the headcount pretty lean, and I mean, I hire overseas too, and I hire both in the US and overseas. Like I'm not, I find ways to be efficient, and it works out pretty well.
I'm excited to follow the progress of ZipMessage with this new ethos of you're focusing on software businesses and you're focusing on keeping it leaner, and you have this skill set in your back pocket of if you need to assemble a 25-person team, you can.
But it's not like I could do that overnight, and I'm not planning on it. So
sure. I'm excited to see the progress, and I'm excited for your launch. I'll be giving you some upvotes on Product Hunt.
I appreciate
it. We've exhausted my list of questions. Chris, have we scratched all your questions that you had?
Yeah, that's it. Where can people find you online? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I am CastJam on Twitter. That's where I spend way too many hours of my day, so you can catch me there. And fellas, I'm a fan of both of you, and what you're building and just doing this podcast. And I just think that I love the Bootstrapper podcasts. I can't get enough of them. I wish more people would. I like to talk about how it's super boring for most of the world, but it's like super interesting for folks like us to tune in. So, yeah, keep doing it.
I'm honored. That's cool to hear. I'm a big fan of you too.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool. All right. That's all I got. So, goodbye.
That's all I got too. Goodbye.